Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Address Your Business Challenges on SAP Cloud, Solutions and Strategies for Success, hosted by SAP Insider and presented by Hexaware. I'm Sean Byers from SAP Insider, and I have a couple of quick announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive between you and the presenters. So we invite you to submit your questions using the question and answer text box in the lower portion of your Zoom. After the presentation, we will host a live Q&A session and we'll answer as many of your questions as possible. I will now hand it over to Raj, SAP Head at Hexaware Technologies. Thank you so much, Raj, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thanks for the introduction. Before we start off, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining. Thanks for joining the webinar today. Before we kickstart, I just wanted to make sure that I read out the safe harbor statement as required from company legal. So certain statements in this presentation concerning our future growth prospects are forward-looking, which involve numerous risks and uncertainties that could cause actual results to differ materially from those in such statements. The risks and uncertainties relating to these statements include, but are not limited to, risks and uncertainties regarding fluctuations in earnings, our ability to manage growth, intense competition in IT services, including those factors which may affect our cost advantage, wage increases globally, our ability to attract and retain highly skilled professionals, time and cost overruns on fixed price, fixed time frame contracts, client concentration restrictions on immigration, our ability to manage our international operations, reduced demand for technology in key focus areas, disruptions in telecommunication networks, our ability to successfully complete and integrate potential acquisitions, liability for damages on our service contracts, the success of companies in which Hexaware has made strategic investments, withdrawal of government fiscal incentives, political instability, legal restrictions on raising capital or acquiring companies outside India, and unauthorized use of our intellectual property and general economic conditions affecting our industry. Sorry, I had to rush through that because it's a safe harbor statement which has to be done. So I got it done. So thank you so much. With that said, thanks for joining once again for webinar today and taking time off of your busy schedules. We just wanted to make sure that you can get the maximum return on your time today where we wanted to share our solutions and strategies, especially for the success of you moving into the cloud, especially the SAP workloads. Please feel free, as Sean pointed out earlier, at any point to share your questions and we will try to answer them at the end of the Q&A session. As well, we also have a link to a self-assessment for your cloud journey at the end of this presentation, which is free. And we would encourage you to, take it, and we would certainly be getting back to you with the results as to where you are on your current journey to the cloud from a SAP perspective. So please do it's free. So please do take advantage of this link. Also, as we proceed, you'll be seeing some of the poll questions coming up during the presentation, and we would certainly appreciate if you could share your valuable feedback for these poll questions. With that said, my name is Raj Tingatruti, and I'm based out of Atlanta and head the SAP practice at Hexaware. With me today are two of my colleagues. One is Murli, who is the Cloud Competency Head and is based out of Chennai in India. And Ms. Swarna, who is the Vice President of Strategy and Planning at CRCL, one of our esteemed customers. And thanks, Swarna, for joining us today and also trying to share your incredible journey into the SAP Cloud. So some of the critical points, what we're going to be covering as a part of today's overall journey would be, what are the things that we typically need to consider for our SAP Cloud journey, right? And what is that we need to evaluate before we get on to that particular journey? And what to choose, right? Because you have too many choices in front of us, whether it's a private cloud, whether it's a public cloud, and even within private cloud, where do I go? Which hyperscaler would I go to, or do I go to a co-location partner? So those are some of the things what you need to be considering. And then we also wanted to share some of the best practices or the best approach options, especially in terms of how do you strategize, and then how do you make sure that your business is not getting affected, that there is zero business downtime, and you're also making sure that you're successful at the end of the journey. And the last but not the least is in terms of how do I measure my return on investment? Because this is one of the big elephants in the room. Typically, any of the organizations would like to ask is, what is my return on investment? I've invested so much of time, effort, and also made sure that we moved everything into the cloud, but I don't see the results. So we have come up with some templates, especially in terms of how do you measure the tangible versus the intangible, what do you call the outcomes of your. So moving on to the next slide, what are the key drivers for the modernization, right? As I say, I mean, like it goes, right? Business is very dynamic and change is constant. These are two things which we see on a daily basis. And as a business from any industry, any vertical, we must constantly evolve our business to address the core challenges, right? On a daily basis. It could be customer centricity, it could be customer acquisition, it could be market reach or market share, addressing your competition at the same time, and then evolving also your products and services. And this goes on a day-to-day basis. Now, underlying and enabling these core challenges, IT has typically been playing an enabler function. So far, we have seen that in the last 15 to 20 years, it's just been playing an enabler function. But with the emerging technologies and within the IT landscapes, now it has moved from being an enabler to the executioner of your business challenges. Basically, it is becoming the front runner to address your business challenges. So with the constant change in the product, services, and within the IT landscape, it is becoming that you need to have the speed, the agility, and the flexibility. But also at the same time, you're also being compliant with any of the services or the products what you're providing, be it in the front office, middle office, or the back office operations. So any organization, be it small, medium, large, are constantly thinking in terms of how do we address this, right? Especially when it comes to your mergers and acquisitions, because these happen on a regular basis, especially if you're looking at some of the emerging companies where there is a lot of M&A happening on a day-to-day basis. Similarly, you have a lot of divestitures which are happening where companies are focusing more onto their core operations and then trying to take out what is not core and then divesting it and then selling it off. And then standardizing and simplifying the operations across the landscapes, trying to reduce the IT footprints, and at the same time trying to reduce the capex, and then trying to see if you can move from capex to opex, and then figure out what are the advantages of capex versus opex, which you're going to cover as one of the slides out here in the deck today. And also one of the most important things which has come out recently, which has been playing to the industry, is the ESG components, especially when it comes to the carbon footprint. And I think we just ended with the COP28 in Dubai, if I'm not mistaken. As mentioned earlier, right, business is dynamic, change is constant. And one of the things which plays very into the role of adapting and then changing is the OCM part of it, which we're also going to be addressing, because OCM, which is organizational change management, is very critical as to how it can cut across your process, your functions, your people, and then without compromising your business and IT goals, and making sure that you're able to realize the company's North Star. Because at the end of the day, everybody wants to reach their North Star, whether it is from a product or whether it is from a services perspective. So modernization has to keep in view the most important goals, especially reaching your North Star, but not compromising in terms of how you're able to leverage the new age technologies, how you're able to combine and simplify your IT landscapes, how you're able to move from CapEx to OpEx, and then how you can move your SAP workloads into the cloud. So moving on to the next slide. Continuing with the word change. Murli, can you please move to the next slide, please? Yeah. So some of the things which everybody faces as of today when it comes to the cloud options, right? Concerns in the cloud option, especially what are the main drivers. And if in case we simply break it down, I think you moved one slide. Can you go back to slide number 5, please? Yeah. So here, what we have done is we've tried to simplify this into a very simple 4-step or the 4 key things what we need to be looking at based on the strategy, right? Like, for example, if you break down these critical factors, whether it is the business challenges or the IT challenges, it is very simple, right? You need to define a strategy. Strategy is very, very critical because you have 2 different strategies, right? Today you have an IT strategy, today you also have a business strategy. But at the end of the day, both of them have to be combined, and then they have to fit into your overall vision of the company. And they cannot be divergent, because IT cannot go in a different direction versus your business strategy. Similarly, spend. which is basically how do I optimize while maximizing the returns. It could be products, it could be services, it could be the outcomes, because the goal is overall reduction in terms of the spend. Third is the simplification, right? Because you have too many technologies, you have too many processes, you have too many functions which are happening on a day-to-day basis, and then you have too many challenges to be facing. So how do I simplify, cutting across right from my end customer all the way to my back office operations? How can I engage and leverage the new age technologies as a part of the simplification? And the fourth is the intelligent operations, right? For example, how do I combine my big data, my AI, my ML, or some of my social channels? Like, for example, if in case we are talking about a lead to cash process, or a CPQ plus a CLM, which is basically configure price quote, and CLM, which is a configure lifecycle management. What happens is, at the end of the day, how flexible I am, how nimble I am, how agile I am, and how compliant I am in terms of making sure that I'm able to leverage these technologies. And we're going to talk more about in detail in terms of how do you take this entire process or a function, and then how do we apply in terms of measuring your return on investment as a part of that. So with that said, with change being constant, moving on to the next slide. Typically, some of the questions which arise, right, as a part of your modernization, as a part of your cloud, moving into cloud, the typical challenges, what you would be looking at is, right, if in case I'm just focusing on SAP side, do I select a private cloud provider? Do I select a public cloud? What is the right approach for me? Do I do a greenfield? Do I do a brownfield? Or do I do a conversion or a migration? Do I do a technical migration, or do I do a complete conversion? Now, what is the impact to the business? So these are some of the things what people look at when it comes to SAP. But also from a cloud perspective, now I need to understand who's a better provider, right? At the end of the day, everybody provides you with the bare metal services which are comparable in the industry. If you look at any of the hyperscalers, whether it's AWS, Google, or Microsoft Azure, and what are the advantages? Do I buy IaaS, or do I buy PaaS, or do I go in for a complete SaaS? Because it all depends on how I'm actually going to buy the SAP and then deploy the SAP within the cloud. Now, what are the key drivers, right? Modernization. When it comes to the modernization piece, is it that I'm just taking my core office or core back office operations into the cloud, or am I also considering, based on my future business strategy, based on my future IT strategy, do I also take the surrounding landscape? Because there are a lot of COTS applications, custom applications within the landscape, and how do I also take them into the cloud? Because again, it depends on the short-term vision versus the long-term vision from a sorry short-term vision from an IT and a business perspective. So these are some of the things what we consider as the key challenges for any organization when it comes to either modernization or cloudification of your SAP services, and then make sure that we are able to address these challenges going forward. And that is the reason I said, how do I make sure that my business strategy is what you call aligned with the IT strategy, and then how does this overall vision ties into the overall vision of the company, which again talks to your North Star for any organization. So moving on to the next slide. So we have a poll question, I think, which is coming up. So based on our industry best practices at Hexaware, we wanted to share some of our insights in terms of how we actually approach this entire strategy, right? How do we consider what is the best option? What are the different templates? How do we take this journey forward? And what are the different factors that I should be considering before moving in SAP into the cloud? Because there are a lot of factors, right? If you look at what is my landscape today, is it complex? Is it medium complex? Is it a very simple landscape? And how deep and customized are my processes? Because each function has different processes which are cutting across COTS applications, which are cutting across custom, and which are also cutting across your entire SAP landscape. How interconnected is my landscape? Because we've come across a lot of organizations which are very, very interconnected, where there are a lot of interfaces going back and forth between different systems within the entire landscape. And also, what is the risk and involved, basically from a business perspective, right? Because what is the kind of impact this is going to happen, impact which is going to hit my business, whether I'm going to have an impact on the business or whether I'm going to have an impact on the operation side of it. So considering all this, so we came up with a framework, and we also have a platform called Triadic, which we are not covering today, but we would certainly be happy to share the Triadic platform, which we have built based on this particular strategy slide. Is that there are simple things, right? If it's a very simple, I would say, landscape where I can move everything, and if I'm totally risk averse, I can actually test out my waters by moving my non-production and my DR to the cloud, because I'm able to buy a full DR or a full HA or a full backup in the cloud for the same cost what I'm spending today on my on-prem, what do you call, data center. And then the second step could be in terms of saying that, okay, now that I moved my DR, non-production, and the backup and HA into the cloud, what is the next, what I would say, logical step for me to do? Because if you look at the databases or you look at the operating systems, the most of these OS and DB are coming to the end of their life cycle from a support perspective as we move forward. The same thing what is happening with SAP as well. SAP is also going to end support for your ECC, and then moving everything into S4, and then they're also trying to push everybody onto the public cloud versus a private cloud. So we have to look at what is that I can do for the second step, because I'm risk averse. So the second step could be in terms of converting my existing HANA database, existing database into a HANA database. But there are two ways, right? Even to approach a HANA as a database, because the advantage is I can take the entire existing DB and then move it into the HANA DB as it is. Basically, I'm doing a technical migration, and then I'm not touching the data as it is, and then putting the ECC on HANA, which becomes a suite on HANA, right? It's a simple process, and then we can get it done. But then if you want to address the elephant in the room, which is basically, do I touch data before I move everything into HANA? Because data is 50% of the work, where we are saying that if in case I'm able to standardize the data, rationalize the data across SAP, across the landscape, if I'm able to make sure that I'm able to harmonize the data across them, then I move it into HANA database and then put ECC on top of the HANA. Then my 50% of the work for my future S4 journey is complete, because data is the big elephant in the room, which I don't have to touch because I've already done that. Now, only thing left for me would be in terms of trying to refine and define my, business processes, cutting across different functions. Because we have already touched data, we're not touching data, and you're sitting on HANA, and then you're moving your ECC to an S4. Similarly, for a medium and a complex landscapes, for example, if you're looking at complex landscapes, typically they're so complex that you cannot, move away from your existing ECC or from your existing DB directly into an S4 using either a brownfield or a bluefield approach, but you'll have to do a complete greenfield approach, which means, again, there's a huge impact to the way you're doing business, the way you're interacting with your end customers or within your internal, I would say, the IT users. And there again, the OCM comes into the picture. Basically, what is the risk appetite? What is the kind of organizational change management I have to do? Because you have to adapt to the new business process. You have to adapt to the new way of doing business. You have to adapt to the new way of looking at data, which is going to be very humongous task. Whereas if it's for a medium I would say medium complex kind of a customer, there it again depends. Where I can do a brownfield because I can take some of the existing processes which are not very complicated, which are very simple, which can be adapted to the COTS and non-COTS applications within the SAP landscape. When I move them into the cloud, then I can do a brownfield implementation. We're going to talk more about this in the next couple of slides. But simply put, we can look at what is our current state, whether it is simple, whether it is very complex, whether it is medium complex. And then we define 4 to 5 different paths going forward, especially in terms of how do I take this journey forward as we begin our SAP cloudification path, especially moving from existing ECC and then moving on to your S4. And S4 could be S4, or it could be Rise with SAP, or it could be Grow with SAP. It depends on the kind of product, what you're looking at, the kind of landscape, what we have currently today, and then what are the industry best practices, what we need to be adapting, and then how do we take this forward based on this particular framework. So the strategy can be defined using this particular framework. And then, as I've been mentioning, we also have platform which you can leverage, especially when it comes to effectively analyzing the current landscape. Please feel free to post your Q&A if in case you have any questions, especially regarding the kind of strategy what we are trying to share with you. We'd be more than happy to answer it during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So moving forward, now that we have defined a strategy, can we more? Yeah. So now that we have defined the strategy, the options in front of us are too many, right? As we were discussing, whether do I go to a public cloud? Do I go to a private cloud? Do I go to a hyperscaler? Do I go to a colo partner? What do I do? Because if in case I want to move away from my data center, what is that cloud journey that I can overtake take over as a part of my entire cloud journey? Especially, I need to not just look at SAP in silos, but then what is my holistic view around the modernization and the cloudification of my entire operations as a company, right? Now, there are certain advantages if it's a private versus a public cloud, right? For public cloud, it's mostly an industry template which you're going to be implementing. And also it's less of customization and integration using your BTP layer. And mostly if it is public cloud, what we've seen is it's a greenfield implementation. Whereas when it comes to private cloud, you have the options, right? You can do a greenfield implementation, you can do a brownfield implementation, or even a bluefield implementation because it's your own private cloud, even with any hyperscaler. And also you can customize it the way you want it. And you're not restricted from a customization perspective. Whereas if you now again look at the integration layer, I can integrate anything within a private cloud, whether it's COTS applications, whether it's on-prem, whether it is in the cloud. And also, when it comes to the public cloud, what happens is the integration layer has to be BTP no matter what, and you have to use the new technologies like your DI, and CI, and so on and so forth. And that becomes a big challenge, especially how do I make sure that my business processes are not getting broken because I'm now in a public cloud. And then what happens to my other processes, how fast or how I can integrate them. Now, in a private cloud, you can buy it as an IaaS or a PaaS, right? Infrastructure as a service, because you can maintain it. They can give you the bare metal, and also platform as a service. You can take your application and then put it out there and then manage, let the provider manage the infrastructure. But here in the public cloud, it becomes more of a SaaS product. Basically, you're just buying the licenses and then using it, right? And it's software as a service. And the other questions, what we need to be considering is the upgrades, because in a public cloud, it's more frequent and you do not have a choice because all the mandatory changes would be going in no matter what. And you have still the optional changes where you can consider whether you want to implement them or you don't want to implement them. But the mandatory changes go on in a regular basis. So it keeps upgrading constantly your OS, your DB, your application, your network, and your infrastructure. Whereas in this private cloud, I can go at my own pace based on my risk and my appetite, and I can make my own decisions whether I want to do it, whether I want to delay it, or whether I want to do it on a continuous basis just to make sure that I'm able to keep up with it. So from a private cloud, when we are looking at upgrades, they could have a minimal impact, which is basically saying that because I'm in control of it. But in public cloud, you have to understand the upgrades could have a cost impact as well, because if in case the provider says yes, for this particular version you need to be upgrading to so and so kernel, you have to go with a certain OS with a certain DB, and then the cost of that would continuously be added on to your operations as well. So this basically leads us to the last point, which is basically infra, right? Infra cost can be contained in a private cloud, whereas in public cloud, you will have to keep spending as in terms of what the product is trying to tell you. So it depends in which fashion or which version would you like to buy, whether it is private cloud or whether it is a public cloud. So once we decide whether it's a private or a public cloud, we embark on a cloud journey, right? So moving on to the next slide. So we do have some of these options, right? Whether it's a greenfield, brownfield. So we have typically what you call 5 different ways to approach. As I said, first is to move your DR and BA and backup onto the what you call cloud. But if I leave that because they're not production systems, for the production systems have 4 different options. One is putting Suite on HANA, basically moving everything, putting it onto HANA database, because this requires minimal change. And also, if in case I'm not touching data, it is very easy for me to move it, lower cost, and it can be time bound, and there is no disruption to the business because you're not touching any of the processes. But it will also boost your performance because you're now moving on to a HANA database, and then you're also able to leverage your Fiori apps, right? But when it comes to brownfield, for example, there is a higher, what I would say, cost and the change management allocated with this. But when you compare it with the cost of a greenfield implementation, these are much lower. And also there is a time bound. This can be time bound, right? And there is a less risk of transformation and also less from a OCM perspective, and comparatively the minimum impact to the business from a brownfield perspective. Now, if you're looking at greenfield, it's a whole new animal. Basically, you're looking at comparatively higher risk, right? Because you do not have the timelines. You do not, the timelines can go longer. But the best part of greenfield is you're able to adapt to the new standards, new industry best practices. You're able to actually get the entire functions relook at and the way you're actually doing the business today. So that's the advantage of greenfield. But the cost could be much higher when you're looking at a greenfield. Now, bluefield, which is a hybrid one, that's a very complex one, which we typically don't recommend to any of the customers because it is a question of leveraging your customization, but also trying to leverage the best of industry practices. And then the cost and the complexity and the timeline become much higher. And that we do not recommend. So these are the 4 different options what you have in front when it comes to the cloudification of SAP. So it depends on the strategy what we are defining, as we discussed in the previous slide, and then defining that roadmap. Once we define the roadmap, then we figure out what is the best solution based on the roadmap in terms of whether it is going to be Suite on HANA, whether it's going to be brownfield, greenfield, or the bluefield approach. So moving on, I think there's a poll question which is coming up. So how do I build an effective business case in order for me to make sure that I'm able to sell it to my internal management, right? Because at the end of the day, I have to make sure that if I'm not able to build what I would say a compelling business case, there is no way for me to move forward. So our strategy is basically based on the 4 simple factors, right? If you look at it, as we discussed, it is strategy, your IT strategy and business strategy, your spend, especially when it comes to spend, how do I reduce my footprint from a spend perspective? Simplification, basically trying to make sure that you're able to simplify the processes across different functions. And then we also look at the intelligent operations, right? Basically, how do I make sure that I'm able to leverage all this into my, what you call the new cloud product from an SAP perspective. For example, we need to make sure that we are able to realize, at least when we move to SAP Cloud, that there is 30 to 40% savings. And that typically happens, right? Especially from an infrastructure and a maintenance perspective, because you're eliminating your data centers, you're eliminating your people who are managing the data centers and the maintenance of the data centers. Similarly, from a network perspective, you're eliminating your networks and everything, right? Making sure that your new cloud provider is also able to give you the faster scalability, agility, right? And at the end of the day, also being compliant, and from a security perspective, how secure, because they have to, at the end of the day, when you're doing your business in the cloud, it has to be very, very secure. And we've seen this happen almost all the time, that most of the hyperscalers give you the ability to control the, what you call, security. And also, at the end of the day, how do I make sure that this is impacting my business processes, and how I'm able to simplify it across the business functions? So these are some of the things what we need to be looking at. And then how do I build a business case based on this, right? How do I make sure? Because there are certain tangible elements in this, and there are also certain intangible elements. Because if I say improve efficiency, reduce cost, it is an intangible thing. But then how do I make sure that this intangible benefit can actually be measured and can be converted into dollars and cents and then be presented to the management, right? So we give you some roadmaps. We also give you some of the guidance. And in the interest of this presentation, I'll just try to cover one example as a part of that. So moving on to the next one, right? What is the advantage also in terms of what I would say one of the considerations is whether it is capex versus opex, right? Now the question comes is, if it is a traditional data center, it's almost going to be a capex, because on a time-to-time basis, I have to make sure that I'm able to manage my data center, I'm able to manage my networks, I'm able to do that. And these are all one-time investments, right, which are going to amortize over a period of time. And this can only feature on your balance sheet. It does not feature on your everyday income statement. And here, the cost of what I would say, the maintenance, the cost of predictability is very, very low, because I do not know when the server is going to go down, or when the switch is not going to work, or when the router is going to go out. And so that becomes very less predictable from an organization perspective. And also, it is very less agile when it comes to the services, right? And also scalability perspective, because if I have to, if a server goes down, and then my lead time to get a server to replace that is like 30 days from any of the service providers, that is actually going to affect my business, and it's going to slow down the way I'm actually running my business, because I will take the workloads and move them onto a different server, which is actually going to slow down the business. But now, if you look at it from a cloud perspective, do I move everything into OpEx and then make sure that it's a recurring expense, variable income, and which will give you the flexibility in terms of being scalable, it's being agile. And then I can also look at my predictive costs, which, because it's on a month recurring costs. So it depends for the risk and the appetite in terms of for us to digest and say that, okay, I would love to move from my on-prem to the cloud. So that is something which we have to consider as a part of our SAP Cloud journey. And moving on to the next one. So this is something which I was talking to you about, right? In the previous slide, where we were talking about how do I make sure that I'm able to get my return on investment. So we just took an example. This is not something which represents the entire part of the thing, but then it is just we took part of some of the functions of any typical organization, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're looking at return on investments, whether it is 10 to 20% from a HANA side, or 10 to 20% from your total cost of ownership of a data center, or 30 to 40% of value increasing in your productivity, or in your business, or in your the customer acquisition. So these are some of the things what we look at. And then how do we make sure that for each of these functions, each of these processes, how do we measure our return on investments? So this is something where we try to define, because for the tangible ones, for example, if I'm looking at infrastructure costs as of today, I can easily compare what are my data center costs versus running this as a service, or as a infrastructure as a service, or platform as a service in the cloud, because that is a month-on-month recurring fee where I know exactly how much I'm spending, right? So it's a tangible one. Similarly, licenses, what I'm spending on-prem versus what I'm spending on the cloud. Now that becomes another tangible one, which I can measure very easily, compare and contrast, and say I can put this into my presentation to the management. Similarly, I can compare the number of servers, physical servers I have today, and then if I have any virtual servers within my data center, and then compare that with the dedicated versus the virtual machines in the cloud. I'm exactly able to tell you the difference in terms of the spend, what I'm doing today versus what I would be recurring in the cloud. Similarly, spending something on from a network perspective, right? For example, how much I'm spending today from my routers, switches, and then also what I would be spending from a cloud perspective, because from a cloud, it's completely different versus on-prem. The most important point where it is a tangible measurement is the people, right? If you have a data center, you're manning the data center, you're making sure that your data center is running 24/7, and then what is the cost of running those operations, which I don't need, which I can completely eliminate once I move it into the cloud. But then you also need to make sure that you have one or two people who are actually manning in terms of how you're consuming the cloud as well, because the consumption of the cloud, if it is out of control, then the cost could be much, much higher. And so these are some of the tangible things what we've been looking at, and some of the intangible things, right? Now, intangible things could be, for example, it's very simple, right? If I try to break this down by function, for example, FTD, forecast to delivery, or O2C, order to cash, or if it is P2P, procure to pay, right? I can take one simple function, for example, which involves my end customer, where I'm using a product like a CPQ, which is in the cloud, right? I'm just assuming that the CPQ is in the cloud. And I have a CLM product, which is SAP, which is sitting on-prem. So today, what happens is I'm not able to measure, because today it is not a dynamic feed into the CPQ from my CLM, for the simple reason I do not know what is my availability of the product. When is that I'm going to manufacture the product? When is that I'm going to be actually executing this at the MES level? Versus how I'm feeding this into the CPQ, which is available to the salesperson on the ground who's actually selling the product to the end customer, and making sure that he's able to configure, quote, and then cross-sell and upsell, right? Now, if I move everything into the cloud, if I move my CLM, if my CPQ is also in the cloud, and if these are interconnected completely, and say today the cycle time it takes for me is 1 week or 10 days for somebody to come back to me and say, you know what, I can give you this upsell, I can give you this cross-sell, there are certain incentives which are running today. Probably I'll come back to you after a week or 10 days, by which time I would have lost my customer. But if in case I'm able to integrate this, if I'm able to reduce my cycle time from 15 days to probably the real time data, that is where I'm able to measure my return on investment, because I'm able to retain my what you call the customer as well. So these are some of the advantages in terms of how you can measure your tangible versus intangible. So I'll not spend much more time, because in the interest of time, what I would do is I would like to hand over the next slide to our esteemed guest, Ms. Swarna, who's going to share her journey in CRCL as to how we were able to help her take this SAP journey into the cloud. With that said, thanks, Swarna. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Raj. I hope you're able to hear me clearly.
Yes.
Thank you. Very good day to everyone. I'm Swarna Rajamni, Vice President Strategy and Planning of CRCL and a member of its executive committee. In this organization, I oversee the development of the enterprise architecture. CRCL is India's largest pure-play food service company, and today we produce and serve more than 275,000 meals per day to our clients across India. It's my pleasure to be part of this webinar today and share some of my experiences on one of the most critical projects in our organization that we had successfully completed along with the Hexaware team in a record time of 44 business days. This journey with Hexaware started last year, Jan 2022, following a demerger from our joint venture partner. Now, post the demerger, we had a lot of other transition activities, and transitioning the SAP architecture to a new architecture of CRCL was on priority, because the entire data of the company was sitting in the parent company's SAP architecture. This company has been using SAP S/4HANA since 2017, and this was on an on-premise version, oldest version, which was on 16.10 of SAP S/4HANA. Now, post the demerger, we had to carve out and build an entire new architecture for CRCL for almost 75 plus users who were using SAP at that point in time. In CRCL, all our sites have SAP embedded for the entire procure to pay process. And this company is the first and only food service player in India to use SAP S/4HANA in an upgraded application version of 2020 for all of its business processes. And while we were doing this complex carve-out process, we also realized that it was not just a simple lift and shift from the earlier architecture, but the project had some inherent challenges which needed to be addressed first, even before the migration could start. And this started with the upgradation of the SAP application itself from 16.10 version to 2020. The second was to upgrade the database from version 1.0 to version 2.0. And at the same time, what we also realized is the domain in which the SAP architecture was hosted also had to be moved to a new Microsoft Azure domain. So with all these three challenges, it was really getting difficult to finish the entire carve-out projects, because the time that we have in hand was very less. So but These challenges were effectively addressed through the partnership of Hexaware, wherein the Hexaware team came up with their proprietary Hex Carport solution, which is part of the triadic platform that Raj was also referring to his presentation earlier. Now, this tool was used to complete the carve-out and deploy a completely new version, as I said, in a record 44 business days. One of the highlights of the entire project was, of course, apart from the 44 business days record time, all the master and transaction data that were in the JV partner system were brought into the new system without any loss, and there were 0 errors post go live, resulting in a very, very smooth transition. The benefits were also equally rewarding monetarily because we saw that the project reaped a benefit of almost 60% of cost benefits. And this project then went on to win the 2022 ISG Digital Case Study Award in Connecticut, USA. Moving on, as part of our digitalization strategy for the upcoming year, we are continuing to work with Hexaware to explore robotic process automation for our accounts payable process. Then there is FIFO implementation, which we would like to have for our stores procurement process. Then we are in talks to implement Fiori to improve our user interface, and also looking to embed Signavio for the business process improvements. I'm really pleased to be part of this SAP program today to share our success story and give you some insight on our way forward plans for digitalization. And based on these insights, Raj, I would now leave to you to take it over from here.
Thank you so much, Swarna, for sharing your journey, especially from SAP perspective and the S4 perspective. Thank you once again. With that said, I wanted to hand it over to Murli, who's a cloud competency head, who's going to talk about more in terms of the hyperscalers and the kind of options what you have. Go ahead, Murli.
Raj. See, when you have your own license or when you want to migrate your SAP application to any hyperscaler, okay, you take the journey into 4 different steps. For example, if you are already on S4 HANA, okay, you can probably do a lift and shift as it is if the versions are compatible. Okay, but if you're on ECC or if you're on if your database is not HANA, okay, in that case, possibly you may do a lift and shift, but you will have a few issues like your OS or DB may not be supported. In this case, you will have to probably do a replatforming of the OS or DB, or you will have to do an upgrade of the existing database. Okay, which brings in to the next step, which is called as OS DB replatforming. Okay, where like when you are migrating your ECC application from, say, for example, Oracle. Okay, you are on Oracle 11G. If you're migrating it to cloud, okay, Oracle 11G may not be in a supported version, so you can use this opportunity to migrate it to Oracle 19C, or you can migrate them to Suite and HANA. So if you're migrating to Suite and HANA, straight away it brings out a 25% performance improvement due to the columnar database structure out here. Okay, and then if the OS, like for example, if you're already hosting your infrastructure on AIX, for example, okay, you may not be able to host them on any of these hyperscalers. So probably you'll have to partner them with like SkyTab, for example, or you will have to replatform them to a compatible operating system. Okay, so if it's a lift and shift, okay, you do a straightforward migration, but when it comes to OS and DB platforming, you probably do either a version upgrade of the database, or you convert the database to Suite and HANA. And when it comes to operating system, either you migrate to SUSE Linux or Windows or Oracle Enterprise Linux or whatever is a compatible version that you want to migrate to. Okay, and the third step, possibly what you can talk about, is like the application transition, which forms the foundation steps for your S4 transformation journey. Okay, what you do in this application transformation step is that you bring your application to the latest S4 HANA level. Okay, your application is in the greatest and latest support of SAP, which means that whatever the tickets that you raise, okay, SAP will be able to support them. Okay, and when you are doing it, okay, you don't do any major modification to the existing processes, but in terms of the technology, you are up to date. So which provides you the platform to move on to the next step, which is called as a business transformation, wherein like once the platform is ready, you will be able to leverage all the other SAP facilities. For example, in case if you want to engage, deploy a set of Fiori apps, or if you want to enable a few mobile setups, or if you want to leverage the BTP platform, okay, all those things you can do it in the business transformation process, okay. And these 4 steps, depending on the complexity, as Raj rightly mentioned, okay, using the triadic platform and our assessment framework, either you can do them together or you can do them incrementally, where like you can pick up the benefits during the journey of your S4 migration. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. Okay, so when how do we do say there are 4 steps which are there, with which you will do the migration if you are on ECC. Okay, so what do I do? Like, which method will be better for me? Like, where can I do a big bang complete migration to S4 HANA, or should I take an incremental approach? Or if there is a conflict, so how do we go about it? So probably what we do is we go with a set of assessment on a set of parameters. Like, for example, we look at the technical feasibility first. Okay, say for example, if your current operating system on which or the current platform on which you have hosted it on-prem, is it compatible with the cloud? Okay, is it compatible with the target state that you are trying to achieve? Okay, by moving it immediately, first, if I'm going to do a lift and shift, what benefit are you going to get out of it? Okay, is it just an infrastructure migration, or are you going to get more benefit out of it? Or what is the technical feasibility I can look at? Okay, so that is one thing which I can take it. Okay, and the second one could be about the business alignment. When I say business alignment, okay, say sometimes what happens is that the customer wants to migrate it, but he may have a limitation. He cannot do it over the weekends. He cannot do it over the customer cannot be able to migrate it over the year end. Okay, or there can be some specific days on which they need the system to be up and running. They cannot, so that it's a drop down date before which they want to do due to a contract closures. Okay, so we align with the business to decide on the go live date, number 1, and then what are all the steps that they want to enable. For example, if the customer wants to enable a set of Fiori functions, but it will take time for them to move on to S4 HANA. In that case, possibly we can try to migrate them to Suite on HANA, with which they will be able to get some additional Fiori apps which they can leverage for the business functioning. Okay, and the third assessment that we do is on the change in management, where what type of training that will be needed for the users, because the entire look, sometimes you may move in from a screen-based or a task-based activity that you are doing on your legacy system, ECC. When you move on to the S4 HANA, you may probably go in for a set of Fiori apps, which means that there is a process change which is in place. Okay, and if you are moving your application database from Oracle to, for example, you will have to migrate to S4 HANA. In that case, you will have to train your database administrators to handle how the HANA system works. And you may not have a high availability in your legacy system, legacy setup, but when you want to move on to cloud, you may want to have a high availability and disaster recovery system in place. So in that case, that the system administrators need to be trained on that part. Okay, so we assess all these change impacts and then probably try to build up on how you can do the change management out. Okay, and the fourth one that we measure is what will be the business outcome in each phase. Like, for example, if I do a big bang, will it be beneficial to you, or should you collect the incremental depending on the complexity of your application? Okay, and the other thing what we do look at is the total cost of ownership. Like, if you move on to what will be the total cost of your application if you are hosting it on-prem? Like, for example, if you are hosting it on a private cloud versus how you are hosting it on a public cloud, and what are all the things that you can leverage apart from the infrastructure that can work out on the cost for you. Okay, and the other thing is and then probably the next one is a timeline, where say you have 1 year timeline for the entire upgrade, entire transformation to S4 HANA. In that case, so can I provide you some initial benefits during between the third or fourth one? Can I get some additional benefits for you within the 6 or 7 months? Like, first I do a database and OS upgrade, okay, and then I do a technical transformation of S4 HANA during 6 or 7 months, and then I do a business transformation during the 11th or 12th months. So in which you can get some incremental benefits out, or can I go in for a big bang? So that based on which we determine the timelines. Okay, and then the product adoption. Okay, which means that or after the transformation, okay, are you in alignment with the SAP product roadmap in terms of your product usage? Say, for example, you may be using a custom app on an older version, okay. You may want to migrate them, or you may want to leverage BTP platform and SAP mobile platform to on the latest transformed version. Okay, so we do assessment on these areas using our set of triadic tools, which Raj mentioned. Okay, one of the assessment tool is FitRight, which is an automated assessment tool. Okay, there is a microsite link which is given on. Possibly you can register on that in case if you want to get your system assessed with our tool. Okay, so one, it can assess your system on all these parameters and come up with a detailed report. Okay, and during the transformation phase, okay, one of the things that you may want to look at is, hey, I am going for a greenfield implementation, so I want to take only the outstanding data or the data that is required for S4HANA, but other data I want to, it is still there in the legacy system. Yeah, I want to leverage it. Okay, I want to leverage the data, but I may not be able to migrate them to S4HANA. In that case, possibly you can look at our data save option, which can host the which can help you to hold the data on a cloud cloud platform, and you can build any reporting solution on top of it. Okay, and then we have during the transformation journey, if you want to do an automated testing, then probably we have a set of tools called Talos, which is a test automation tool, which can do a behavioral testing on your Fiori apps and all. Okay, and Watch is an information analytics tool which can look and monitor the performance of your systems which are hosted on cloud. Okay, and Cloud Murphy is like if you have any other application which you are integrating or integrating with S4HANA, or if you're migrating them to or merging them into S4HANA. For example, you have a legacy system for your HR. Like for example, you may have a Lawson system or a PeopleSoft system. Okay, and you want to migrate those data into SuccessFactors, or there is you are on Oracle EBS. You want to migrate those financial data, module data into SAP. You can use Cloud Murphy. Okay, these are the tools which we have it as a proprietary tool in Hexaware. And along with that, we use the SAP tools for the SAP Solution Manager and Migration Manager. Okay, so with all these assessment, the output that we intend to bring out is, so probably we determine the data deployment model, how you can migrate to S4. Okay, we do a business model fitment on what will be the best methodology for you to take it forward with a minimal risk. Okay, and how the solution roadmap for the future. Okay, and high level fit gap for your products. Like you may have a set of custom products as well. How do we fit them into your new ecosystem? Okay, and we build in the target operating model level 1 and level 2. Okay, and what are all the benefits? We help you to prepare the business case for the transformation journey and at tentative transformation cost. Okay. This is a sample report, what I was talking about on the assessment tool FitRight.
Yeah.
And see, when you are migrating to cloud, okay, so these are like a standard set of benefits which all the cloud service providers highlight. Okay, number one is that you have a lower total cost of ownership due to the capex to opex change. Okay, and then for the non-production systems, if you are not using them, you can shut down the system or put them onto snooze. Or if there is a legacy system, you can put them onto snooze and you can just bring it up whenever it is needed. And it's an on-demand infrastructure. So for any new projects that you are bringing in, you can use a new hardware only for the project only for the project duration, and you can shut them down once it is completed. And whenever you want to do an upgrade of an infrastructure, it's pretty much easier to do it. Okay. And on top of it, you have all these 100+ compliance for which most of the cloud service providers have. And the security compliance is also like international for all the providers. Okay, so Raj?
Yeah, thank you so much, Murli. I think we are almost at the bottom of the hour. Given that we have 3 more minutes, we have some questions which have come up, but then we would certainly try and get back to you on those questions. So these are some of the examples where we have done different approaches based on the complexity, based on the landscape, based on the requirements from the customer side. We can certainly share these detailed case studies with you. And as well, Murli, can you please move on to the next slide, please? There is a link which I just wanted to emphasize, especially which is free. So you're going to get this kind of sample report, what you were looking at, which Murli was sharing earlier. So you can reach out to us at this, what I would say, the email address, or you can go register yourself onto that microsite and then see where you are on the cloud journey, and then how you would like to take advantage of the strategies and how you can build a complete cloud strategy, especially for making sure that your SAP cloud journey is a success. And also you're able to convince the management in terms of why we need to move to the cloud, whether it's S4HANA, whether it's Grow with SAP or with Rise with SAP. So thank you once again to everybody for joining and then spending your valuable time with us. With that said, I will hand this over back to Sean. Sean, thank you so much. I hand it over back to you to close it out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This has been a really, really great discussion for sure. As you mentioned, that is all of the time that we have today. If we didn't get to any of your questions, someone from the Hexaware team will follow up with you as soon as possible. We really want to thank each and every one of you for attending today's webinar. Shortly after this live event, you will receive an email reminder that you can access the webinar on demand. On behalf of SAP Insider and Hexaware, thank you again for your time, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
And thanks once again to even Sumna Swarna. Thanks for joining and sharing your valuable experience. So thanks to everyone.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day. Thank you.